Imagine falling in love with someone from another country. Everything feels magical at first. Late-night calls turn into daily routines. Sweet messages become emotional lifelines. And slowly a stranger becomes the most important person in your life. For Jenny Slaton, love didn't just feel real. It felt like destiny. She wasn't looking for drama. She wasn't chasing fame. She was simply looking for happiness, and when Sumit came into her life it felt like she finally found it. Their connection started online like so many modern love stories. A simple message turned into a deep emotional bond. They talked for hours, shared secrets, laughed together and built a connection that felt stronger than distance, stronger than doubts, stronger than anything that tried to come between them. But what Jenny didn't realize at the beginning was that love alone isn't always enough, especially when it crosses cultures, traditions and expectations that run deeper than emotions. As their relationship grew stronger, so did the challenges waiting ahead. Sumit wasn't just a man in love, he was also a son. A member of a traditional Indian family where culture and family expectations hold powerful control over personal choices. And for Jenny, stepping into that world would change everything she thought she knew about love. At first everything felt like a dream. The idea of finally meeting, finally being together in person, finally closing the distance that had separated them for so long. It was exciting, emotional and overwhelming in the best way possible. Jenny made a life-changing decision. She left behind her comfort zone, her country, her familiar life, and moved to India to be with the man she loved. It was a bold move, a risky move. But for her it was worth it. Because love was supposed to conquer everything, right? But reality doesn't always follow the script we imagine. The moment she stepped into India, she wasn't just entering a new country. She was entering a completely different world. A world filled with traditions, expectations and unspoken rules that she wasn't prepared for. Simple things started to feel complicated. Daily life felt unfamiliar and the comfort she once had slowly started to fade. But the biggest challenge wasn't the language, the food, or even the lifestyle. It was the invisible pressure of tradition, the expectations from Sumit's family, the judgment, the resistance, the feeling of not being accepted. Jenny found herself in a situation where love was no longer just about two people. It became a battle between heart and culture, between personal happiness and family honor. And slowly the fairy tale she once believed in started to crack. Doubt began to replace certainty. Fear started to replace excitement, and questions she never asked before began to surface. Was love really enough to survive all of this? Could she truly belong in a place where everything felt against her? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go to fight for a love that was now being tested like never before? Because this wasn't just a love story anymore. This was a journey of sacrifice, identity, and emotional strength. And what started as a simple online romance was about to turn into one of the toughest challenges of her life, because this wasn't just a love story anymore. This was a journey of sacrifice, identity, and emotional strength. And what started as a simple online romance was about to turn into one of the toughest challenges of her life. The reality of living in India slowly began to settle in, and with it came moments that Jenny could never have imagined. Every day brought a new layer of difficulty. Things that once seemed small now felt overwhelming. The difference in culture wasn't just visible. It was deeply rooted in every part of life. From the way people spoke to each other to the expectations placed on relationships, everything felt structured, everything felt controlled. And for Jenny, who had lived a more independent life, this shift was not easy to accept. She found herself constantly trying to adjust, trying to understand, trying to fit into a system that didn't seem to have a place for her. But the real pressure didn't come from the outside world. It came from within the walls of Sumit's family. A place where tradition wasn't just respected, it was absolute. Where family honor came before personal happiness, and where decisions weren't made by individuals but by the collective expectations of everyone involved. Jenny quickly realized that she wasn't just in a relationship with Sumit. She was also facing the weight of his entire family's beliefs. Their disapproval wasn't hidden. It was clear, strong, and impossible to ignore. The age difference between Jenny and Sumit became a major issue, something that was constantly brought up, constantly judged, and constantly used as a reason to reject their relationship. In a society where traditional norms define what is acceptable, their love stood out in a way that made people uncomfortable, and that discomfort turned into resistance. Sumit was caught in the middle, torn between the woman he loved and the family he couldn't walk away from. Every decision he made felt like a betrayal to someone, and that pressure slowly started to affect their relationship. Arguments became more frequent, misunderstandings grew deeper, and the emotional connection that once felt unbreakable started to weaken under stress. Jenny began to feel alone, even when Sumit was right beside her, because the support she needed wasn't always there, and the reassurance she once felt slowly started to fade. She questioned everything, her decision to move, her belief in love. her future in a country that didn't fully accept her. There were moments when she felt strong, moments when she believed she could fight through it all. But there were also moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments where everything felt like it was falling apart. The dream she once had was no longer simple. It had become complicated, heavy, and emotionally exhausting. And yet despite everything she didn't give up. Because walking away would mean losing the one thing she had sacrificed everything for. But staying meant continuing a fight that seemed to have no clear end. And as time went on, the tension only grew stronger. The expectations became harder to ignore and the reality of their situation became impossible to escape. Because love was no longer the only thing that mattered. Now it was about survival within a world that refused to bend. And Jenny was about to face even bigger challenges that would push her limits further than ever before. And just when Jenny thought the emotional pressure couldn't get any worse, life found another way to test her. Because the conflict was no longer only about approval. It was now about endurance, about how much pain a person can carry before love starts to feel heavier than hope. Every conversation inside that house felt loaded. Every silence felt like judgment. Every look carried meaning. And Jenny could sense that no matter how hard she tried, no matter how respectful she was, no matter how much she adjusted herself, she was still seen as the outsider, the woman who did not belong, the woman who had entered a family structure that never planned to accept her. And that truth hurt more than any direct insult ever could. Because rejection becomes even more painful when it is woven into daily life, when it greets you in the morning and follows you into the night. And for Jenny, this emotional weight slowly turned into exhaustion. She was not only fighting to protect her relationship, she was fighting to protect her sense of self, trying not to lose who she was while constantly being reminded that who she was would never be enough in that environment. Sumit saw her pain. He knew what she was carrying. But seeing pain and stopping it are not always the same thing. Because he too was trapped inside a system that had shaped him his entire life. A system built on obedience, family duty, and the fear of disappointing the people who raised him. So even when his heart wanted one thing, his reality kept pulling him in another direction. And that emotional split made him weaker in moments when Jenny needed him strongest. Sometimes he tried to comfort her. Sometimes he promised things would get better. Sometimes he asked for patience. But patience is difficult when every day feels like another piece of your spirit is being chipped away. Jenny had crossed oceans for love, left behind familiarity for love, endured criticism for love. But now she was facing the terrifying question that every person in a painful relationship eventually faces. How much more can I take before I stop recognizing myself? And that question did not leave her mind. It followed her during quiet mornings, during tense dinners, during lonely nights when even the person she loved could not fully reach her. Because this was the cruelest part of it all. She was not alone physically, but emotionally she often felt abandoned, not because Sumit did not care, but because care without action can begin to feel like distance. And distance inside a relationship is sometimes more dangerous than distance between countries. The pressure around marriage made everything even more intense, because marriage was not just a romantic milestone here. It was a cultural battlefield. For Jenny, marriage meant security, commitment, and a future finally made official. But for everyone around them it meant far more than two people choosing each other. It meant family reputation, social acceptance, tradition, image, and control. And the more serious marriage became, the more resistance appeared. Every step forward felt like it came with 10 steps of backlash. Every sign of progress was followed by another emotional setback. And what should have been a joyful chapter in their love story became a source of fear and instability. Jenny began to understand that in this world love was never simply private. It belonged to everyone's opinion, everyone's expectation, everyone's rules. And that realization made her feel trapped. Because how do you build peace with someone when your relationship is constantly being judged by forces outside of it? How do you stay emotionally safe when your happiness depends on approval that may never come? These questions turned her days into emotional marathons. And still she kept going. Because a part of her refused to believe that all this suffering could be for nothing. A part of her still held on to the memory of the man she fell for. The hope that somewhere beneath all the fear, all the delays and all the family pressure, there was still a future worth fighting for. But hope can become fragile when reality keeps crushing it. And soon Jenny started to notice that the struggle was changing her. She was becoming more anxious, more sensitive, more tired. The spark she once carried was dimming under the pressure of survival. Even ordinary conversations could turn emotional. Even small disagreements could reopen old wounds. Because when people are under too much stress, nothing stays small for long. Pain magnifies everything. And their relationship was now living under the shadow of constant emotional magnification. One misunderstanding could spiral into tears. One delayed promise could feel like betrayal. One cold reaction from family could undo days of progress. And through all of that, Jenny still had to wake up and keep believing, keep trying, keep telling herself that love had not brought her this far only to break her completely. But deep inside the fear was growing. Fear that she might always be the compromise. Fear that Sumit might never truly choose a life separate from his family's control. For that no matter how much they loved each other, tradition might always stand taller than their dreams. And that fear began to shape the way she looked at everything. It changed her expectations, changed her tone, changed the emotional rhythm of their relationship. Because once fear enters love, it does not stay quiet. It whispers doubts into every promise and places questions inside every plan. And now Jenny was no longer just trying to win acceptance. She was trying to hold together a future that felt like it could collapse at any moment. And the hardest part was knowing that the next chapter would demand even more from her. More patience, more sacrifice, more emotional strength. Because what was coming next would not only test her relationship with Sumit, it would test whether she still had the strength to keep fighting for a love that had already cost her so much. Because what was coming next would not only test her relationship with Sumit, it would test whether she still had the strength to keep fighting for a love that had already cost her so much. The situation began to reach a breaking point where emotions could no longer be hidden behind patience and silence. Everything that had been building inside Jenny slowly started to come to the surface. The exhaustion, the frustration, the feeling of never truly being accepted. It all turned into moments where she could no longer hold herself together the way she used to. There were days when even the smallest issue felt overwhelming. Because it was never just about that one moment. It was about everything she had been carrying for so long. And when emotions finally start to spill over, they don't come out quietly. They come out all at once. Intense and impossible to ignore. Jenny found herself breaking down in ways she hadn't before. Questioning not only her situation but also her decisions. Wondering if love had blinded her to realities she should have considered earlier. Wondering if she had given up too much of herself for something that might never fully become stable. And these thoughts were not easy to face because they challenged the very foundation of everything she believed in. Sumit could see this change. He could feel the distance growing not just from his family but between him and Jenny as well. And that created a new kind of pressure. One where he was no longer just trying to balance two worlds. He was trying to stop both from falling apart at the same time. But the truth was he had already delayed too many decisions, avoided too many confrontations and hoped for solutions that never fully came. And now those delays were catching up with him. Because there comes a point where time itself becomes part of the problem. Where waiting no longer feels like patience but starts to feel like avoidance. And Jenny had reached that point. She no longer wanted promises about the future. She wanted clarity. She wanted action. She wanted to know if all of this struggle was leading somewhere real or if she was holding on to something that would always stay uncertain. The topic of marriage returned again, but this time it felt heavier, more urgent, more emotional. Because now it wasn't just about commitment. It was about validation. About proving that their relationship was strong enough to stand against everything that had tried to break it. But even at this stage the obstacles didn't disappear. The family pressure remained strong. The expectations remained rigid and the fear of backlash continued to influence every step Sumit tried to take. And this created moments where Jenny felt like she was fighting alone. Like every step forward required her to push harder than she should have to. Like love had become something she had to constantly defend instead of simply experience. And that realization hurt deeply. Because love is supposed to feel like a safe place, not a constant struggle for approval, not a battle that drains you more than it fulfills you. And yet here she was still trying, still holding on, still hoping that something would finally change. But hope without progress can slowly turn into disappointment. And disappointment when repeated enough times can turn into emotional fatigue. And that fatigue started to show in her voice, in her reactions, in the way she looked at situations that once filled her with excitement. The dream she once had was no longer shining the same way. It had been worn down by reality, shaped by conflict and tested by time. And still the biggest question remained unanswered. Would Sumit truly choose a life with her no matter the consequences? Or would he continue to stand between two worlds without fully stepping into either one? This uncertainty became the center of everything. It influenced every conversation, every decision, every emotional moment between them. And as the pressure continued to build, it became clear that something had to give. Because no relationship can survive forever in a state of constant tension. Something either breaks or finally transforms. And Jenny could feel that they were getting closer to that moment. A moment where everything they had been through would lead to a final direction. Not just emotionally but in reality. Because this was no longer just about feelings. This was about the life they were trying to build. And whether that life could actually exist in a world that had resisted them from the very beginning. And as that realization settled in, Jenny prepared herself for whatever was coming next. knowing that the next step could either bring the peace she had been searching for or finally force her to make the hardest decision of all, to let go of a love she had fought so hard to keep alive. To keep alive. And that possibility alone was enough to shake everything inside her, because letting go was never part of the plan. She didn't cross continents, didn't endure judgment, didn't sacrifice comfort just to walk away. But sometimes life doesn't ask what you planned. It forces you to face what is real. And Jenny was now standing at that exact point, where emotions and reality were no longer aligned, where love still existed but the path forward felt uncertain. And in that uncertainty she had to make a choice, not just about Sumit but about herself, about how much she was willing to endure, about what kind of life she truly wanted, and whether that life could exist in a place where she constantly felt like she had to prove her worth. Sumit also reached a moment where he could no longer stay in between. The space he had been living in, trying to keep both his family and Jenny, was no longer sustainable. Because eventually life demands clarity. It demands decisions. And it demands responsibility for those decisions. He had to face the truth that love requires courage, not just emotion. Courage to stand up, courage to choose, courage to accept the consequences that come with that choice. And for the first time everything became real in a way it hadn't before. The future was no longer a distant idea. It was right in front of them, waiting to be decided. The conversations became more direct, more honest, more emotional. Things that had been avoided were finally spoken, fears that had been hidden were finally expressed, and in those moments there was no space left for illusion, only truth remained. Jenny made it clear that she could not continue living in uncertainty, she could not keep sacrificing herself for a future that might never fully arrive. She needed commitment, she needed stability, she needed to feel chosen not just in words but in actions, and that honesty changed everything, because it placed the responsibility directly where it had always been. On Sumit's ability to decide what mattered most to him. And this time there was no delay, no avoidance, no middle ground left to hide in. The decision had to be made. And when it finally came it carried the weight of everything they had been through, every argument, every tear, every moment of doubt and every memory of love. Because choices like this are never simple. They are built from everything that came before them. And in that final stretch what mattered most was not just love, but strength, the strength to stand by it, the strength to protect it and the strength to build a life from it despite everything that tried to break it. And for Jenny this moment became more than just the outcome of a relationship. It became a reflection of her entire journey. A journey of leaving everything familiar behind, stepping into the unknown, facing rejection, fighting emotional battles and still holding on to hope even when it felt fragile. And regardless of the outcome one thing was clear, she had changed. She was no longer the same woman who started this journey with simple dreams and blind optimism. She had become stronger, more aware, more grounded in reality. And sometimes that growth comes with pain, sometimes it comes with difficult realizations, but it also comes with clarity. And clarity is what allows a person to finally understand what they truly deserve. Whether that means continuing the fight or finally choosing peace over struggle. Because at the end of the day love is not just about holding on. It is also about knowing.